Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. If you take a look at Republic history, most of the major conflicts and wars that have devastated the populace can be traced back to the conflict between the Jedi and Sith. We have the 100 Years of Darkness, which happened more than 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, followed by the Great Hyperspace War, where the Sith almost took Coruscant. Then, 1,000 years later, we had the Great Sith War, triggered by one of the proxies of the Sith, the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders, followed by the Jedi Civil War between the fallen Jedi Revan and the Republic. This is then followed by the Great Galactic War, where Coruscant is actually sacked and the Republican Jedi are tricked into signing a pretty horrible peace deal. A Cold War ensues for many years after that, which further degrades galaxy-wide civilization and led to the 1,000-year-long New Sith War, which brought about a dark age to the Republic. This period was defined by limited technological advancements and the return of feudalism. Even the battles themselves were fought with much more primitive weapons. It was a pretty bad time to be alive. Like, if you weren't careful, you could easily be pressed into service for the Brotherhood of Darkness or the Army of the Light. It didn't really matter which side you were on. Most non-Force sensitives did not last long on the front lines. We do have 1,000 years of peace after the New Sith Wars, but then that leads to the Clone Wars, the Galactic Civil War, and the First Order versus Resistance conflict, and that period of fighting destroyed a lot of planets. All of this is caused, again, by this small group of Force users who have a disagreement on how one should use the Force. Of course, it's a lot more complicated than that. The Sith have done some truly horrendous things in their history, caused massive destruction and suffering. But the part that a lot of Star Wars fans forget is that the Jedi created the Sith. Right? The Sith came from the Jedi ranks. You see, in Legends, before even the Republic was started, a mysterious entity gathered up Force users from all across the galaxy and deposited them in the Tython system. It was there that the Jedi was formed, the precursor to the modern Jedi Order we all know. Interestingly enough, the Jedi view of the Force was far more nuanced and advanced than the modern Jedi. The ancient Jedi practiced alchemy, manipulated the midichlorians themselves to do all sorts of wild things like create life or create organic materials. They're far less dogmatic, they had less structure, and they were more focused on helping the individual cultivate their own relationship with the Force. And all across the planet of Tython, 9 temples would be erected by the Jedi, teaching different areas of the Force like healing, balance, martial arts, alchemy, etc. Young Jedi initiatives would go on a journey called the Great Journey, and it would take around 2 years, and they have to visit all 9 of these temples, where they would, of course, learn from each school of the Force. The Jedi, out of necessity, learned how to utilize both the dark and light side of the Force. You see, Tython wasn't just a normal planet. It was extremely rich in the Force, to the point where the surface was relatively unstable. And oftentimes you had these massive Force storms striking, and there were also dangerous creatures everywhere you looked. And so, Force users needed the complete spectrum of the Force to survive these very dangerous environments. The Jedi cautiously used the dark side to enhance their abilities. The passion and drive we all have in ourselves makes us also stronger fighters. The Jedi understood that every person has darkness. It's not evil, it's just a naturally occurring thing. The dark side becomes problematic if we don't confront it, if we just bury our emotions and feelings deep into our psyche. Learning how to control the darkness inside of oneself is really crucial in preventing the Jedi from falling completely to the dark side. During the Clone Wars, Jedi turned to the dark side in droves when they entered the battlefield, a place of danger, suffering, and fear. For some Jedi, it was just too much, and they didn't know how to deal with their own feelings in a healthy and responsible way because the Jedi never trained them to. Now, I know some Star Wars fans really don't like the shift away from the classic black and white morality that we see in the original trilogy towards something a bit more nuanced. And honestly, I get it. Star Wars began as a myth, a story about the eternal struggle between good and evil, and there's something incredibly satisfying and comforting about that clarity. Give me Red Dawn or an Arnold or Stallone movie from the 80s, and I will enjoy it. Sometimes it feels good to shut the brain off and absorb just a simple cathartic narrative. Fiction doesn't always need to reflect reality, and most people can differentiate the difference. But I'd argue that once we moved from the original trilogy into the prequel era, Star Wars itself evolved. George Lucas didn't just tell a myth anymore, he built a political tragedy that was very specific and detailed. The prequels show how institutions decay, how democracies fall, and how even well-intentioned organizations like the Jedi can make devastating mistakes. That doesn't make the story worse or too political, it just makes it richer. This also happens to be the version of Star Wars I was introduced to as a kid. And perhaps more importantly, I see the damage that black and white narratives do in the real world. I mean, all over social media, on sites like YouTube, you have these very extreme narratives that try to paint the other side as completely evil. You know, the Democrats are evil child molesters, the Republicans are evil fascists. These black and white depictions of the other side are usually harmless in movies, but when even a small portion of society believes in such nonsense in real life, that can turn to real political violence and chaos. The real problem with extreme movements is they completely dehumanize the other side. They don't see any reason to compromise. They just want to kill the other people. I mean, that's just not acceptable, I think, for the majority of people. Anyway, I really love that line from Obi-Wan Kenobi at the end of Revenge of the Sith. Only a Sith deals in absolute, which itself is like an absolute statement. This line shows us that those who partake in black and white thinking don't even realize the trap they have put themselves into and the dark path that they will eventually head down. Because the only way you can maintain a black and white view of something is by ignoring reality, by keeping yourself isolated from the truth. So how do we go from a bunch of Jedi who have a more Eastern spiritual view of the dark and light side, you know, yin and yang, not two conflicting forces, but two balancing forces, to the more modern Jedi Order and these more zealous knights like Obi-Wan Kenobi, who despite being incredibly wise and compassionate, is blinded by his disgust for the Sith? Well, like most ideologies, like most religions, it takes a lot of time and a lot of conflict for things to unravel. Look at the Protestant Reformation, a very philosophical departure from Catholicism. This led to some horrendous violence and oppression early on, but that eventually petered out as Christianity started to reform. This also led to a separation between church and state in most Christian majority countries, which is incredibly important. Also, spiritual theological disagreements are far more abstract and can usually be settled through just discourse and without bloodshed. But then you have some ideologies that split because of a political secession crisis, like the split between the Sunni and Shia sects in Islam. The original conflict wasn't really about theology, it was about who should lead the Muslim community after the Prophet's death. And while Sunnis and Shia do coexist in many parts of the world, that early political fracture still echoes in the power structure of certain states. That's why you see regional rivalries like Iran's influence versus the Gulf states. Again, theological disagreements like the ones we find in Christianity more commonly can be solved in debate and discussion. But when you're fighting to control and influence one of the largest religions in the world, real power dynamics and political ambition are involved. And when religion and politics intersect, that creates a very powerful and oftentimes uncontrollable mix. And this isn't just like Islam's problem, right? Like any religion that mixes with politics can run into some pretty dangerous territory, whether it's like, you know, Hinduism or Christianity or anything else. Now, the Jedi split was far more complex and, dare I say, intimate. The Force is not just some abstract idea, it is something that every Force user interacts with on a daily basis. It is empirically real and observable. Even Han Solo says so. Therefore, the spiritual and theological arguments here are not abstract, like in our world where religion is subjective and mostly faith-based. Although I swear, the other day I saw a Korean Jesus in Chinatown and he was turning Louis Vuitton bags into loaves of bread for the poor. And so the Force isn't just an ideology, it's power. Real, immediate, and perhaps more importantly, personal power that is life-changing in many ways to Force users. Every Jedi's connection with the Force is extremely personal, as the Force is the very fabric of life. Many Jedi are guided and driven by the cosmic Force's will. Many Jedi find comfort and solace in their connection with the Force. At the same time, those Jedi who are drawn towards the dark side most likely have some personality factors that push them in that direction. You know, increased aggression and passion. I've always said that some people like Anakin are just naturally aligned to the dark side, and because the Jedi wanted Anakin to suppress those very natural feelings he was having, that caused an internal conflict within Anakin that was unsustainable. You know, the Jedi were right to be a bit fearful, right? Like in their defense, when a Jedi falls to the dark side, a lot of death and destruction usually follows. But when the Jedi decided to preemptively stop Jedi from falling to the dark side by banning any interaction with it, they succumbed to the very fear that they wisely warned their own people against. I mean, take a look at the first great Jedi schism in 24,500 BBY. A Jedi Knight by the name of Zendor emerges from the rank and file. He was a deeply philosophical person, very individualistic. He believed that passion was inherently corrupt. He believed that for the Jedi to be whole, one needed to return to the old ways and explore their darker emotions to truly master the Force. He also believed the Jedi Order had become too controlling, too restrictive of its members, and the harmony they had created, didn't really work for everyone. Zendor didn't want to rebel against the Jedi, though. He just wanted reform, but his ideas attracted the attention of like-minded Jedi. And that kind of freaked the Order out. They saw Xendor as a threat, and they started cracking down on kind of dark side activities in the institution. Xendor ultimately asked for the Jedi's permission to create a new academy to study alternative views of the Force, as was common during the Jedi era, but again, the Jedi refused. Xendor had no choice. He had exhausted all options, and so he would actually depart and he would start his own faction, known as the Legion of Leto. The dark side and its power can be addictive to some personalities, but the very existence of the Grey Jedi and the Jedi show us that not everyone falls to the dark side when exposed to it. Some people either develop control through experience or are naturally just disciplined like Mace Windu and can compartmentalize such emotions in a way that it doesn't corrupt them. And this is what the Legions of Leto wanted to figure out. Now, it's hard to say who started the actual fighting in the Great Schism. The Jedi were the ones who first raised the military force and then threatened the Legions of Leto, but it was the Legions of Leto that started the first attack. Xendor's much smaller faction would ultimately find themselves on the losing side of the conflict. The Jedi weren't just satisfied with defeating Xendor's movement. They wanted to completely destroy the ideology and would hunt down Xendor's followers to the last man and woman. Genocide and the deliberate destruction of the other side's culture, unfortunately, was a common occurrence in the Jedi and Sith Wars. I mean, during that counter-invasion after the Great Hyperspace War, the Jedi specifically targeted Sith temples and literature. And so, in the aftermath of the Great Schism, a lot of the Jedi who fought against the Legions of Leto felt saddened by the conflict, and a lot of them admitted that they believed that the Jedi Order was partially responsible for things getting out of control. And that's because a lot of these Jedi knew the individuals who joined Xendor. I mean, these are not greedy or power-hungry or violent or angry individuals that we normally associate with the Sith. These were adventurers, the deep thinkers, the rebels, and independent-minded. They were just different, not evil. And the Legions of Leto, well, never took territory and never massacred people. They just was focused on exploring the dark side of the Force. All of the accusations against the Legions of Leto were fear-based predictions of what they could become. Although in the Jedi's defense, we don't really know what would have happened with the Legions of Leto within a few generations. It is possible another schism would occur between the more intellectually curious dark side Force users and the more chaotic ones that have fallen to the dark side. There would be many schisms following the first one, and every new group of dark Jedi exiles understood the Order's past history and understood the great lengths at which the Jedi would go to destroy them. The second Great Schism in 7000 BBY, which is commonly associated with the actual Sith ideology and movement, started out in a very similar way. The first dark Jedi were simply curious and started researching forbidden Force techniques like Mechudiro, a dark side Force power that allowed the users to exert influence over inanimate and mechanical objects and make them come alive, powered by the dark side of the Force. There's also research into various forms of Force alchemy that were first created by the Jedi on Tython. Again, the practice itself isn't inherently evil. The entire Night Sister clan on Dathomir practice a very ancient form of Force alchemy using the magical Ichor on their homeworld. Alchemy is actually a pretty broad subject. Some individuals used it to create wild animals, war beasts like the Leviathan, when others like Jedi Ranger Lunary Brock used the talent to manipulate her own cells to heal a gaping wound in her body. She also used skin particles to invade the brain of another individual and basically wipe their memory. I know this is different from a Jedi mind trick, but the result isn't all that different. There are also dark Jedi who wanted to learn more about the midichlorians so they could understand how Force users connected to the Force. These individuals were branded as heretics by the Order, which would lead to a conflict known as the 100-Year Darkness. And just like the Jedi Order feared, all of these dark Jedi intellectual pursuits would be weaponized into horrifying things. The crazy thing is, most Jedi attempts to stop the Dark Jedi led to preemptive strikes or action that only hardened the Dark Jedi, and in many ways forced them to dig deeper into the darkness and use it as a shield against the Jedi Order, which of course only sped up the corruption and ultimate fall of these Dark Jedi. You know, Xendor and the Dark Jedi of the Second Schism, they were completely outnumbered, and they didn't really have many other options. Their only edge was really the dark side. This is why the Jedi Order always preaches that fear is a poisonous thing that can lead to drastic action that causes more damage. This is why Yoda doesn't like prophecies, because it creates fear of the future, which again leads to drastic and cruel action. The Jedi understood the danger of fear very well, but were blind to their own fear of the dark side. When the Dark Jedi started deploying terrifying Leviathans that sucked the life energy out of people, they needed to be destroyed. But again, the Jedi had created these monsters. By not trusting their brothers and sisters, they had pushed them into a self-fulfilling prophecy. Not all that different from the one that affected Anakin. But here's the Jedi's greatest folly. After the Second Great Schism, the Order spared the remaining exiles, disarmed them, and put them on ships to the peripherals of the galaxy, allowing them to escape and start over anew. And these exiles somehow landed on the planet of Korriban, home of the species known as the Sith. These were humanoids with latent dark side Force powers, and quickly the exiles ruled over the species and started the first Sith kingdom. The Jedi started a conflict and they lack the guts to actually finish it. And the exiles, the Sith, well, they never forgot about what the Jedi did to them. They stayed bitter, waited in the shadows for nearly 1,000 years, planning their revenge. Sounds like another group of Sith I know. So we know what happened. Now, how do you actually reform the Jedi to prevent these schisms from happening time and time again? How do you prevent the Sith from emerging? Well, to begin with, the Jedi need to stop molding all of their people into one type of Force user. It just doesn't make sense. There's so many diverse personalities in the galaxy, and a lot of them don't fit into the rigid Jedi hierarchy. If you take a look at the real world, everyone has personality factors that make them more aligned to conservative or liberal values. Now, obviously, a lot of us are affected by environmental factors like your parents, like where you grew up, what your schooling was like. Maybe, you run into some charismatic political leaders in your younger age and you get swayed to one side or another. But yeah, we're all naturally born aligned to a certain political philosophy. This is also why partisanship and extreme views on politics that try to dehumanize the other side are kind of stupid. And that's because people oftentimes can't help that they're conservative or liberal. And to hate them for that is as dumb as hating someone because of their sexual orientation or racial makeup. It really isn't as much of a choice as people think it is. And the same thing is true about the Jedi and Sith. More open-minded individuals who don't like structure, who are curious in nature, are probably going to be aligned with Sith philosophy and reject the rigidness of the Order. But that doesn't make them evil or bad, it's just the mindset. If we can normalize emotional complexity and create Jedi Order that doesn't shame individuals like Anakin or Qui-Gon Jinn or Count Dooku, but instead in good faith embraces them and helps them deal with their more troubling qualities, I don't think schisms happen nearly as much. I mean, in the late Republic era when they were the most lost, the Jedi even forbade their members from studying Sith history and Sith artifacts. All the Sith items in the Great Library were closely guarded, and the Jedi needed a really good reason to access them. And so the Jedi of that period were trained to fear the Sith and were taught to, fight the Sith if they encountered them, but they had no idea what the Sith were actually like and how they thought. I think the late Republic Jedi also suffered from the illness of peace. Simply put, when there is no conflict for such a long period of time, there's no Darksiders to fight. The Jedi started turning inwards and started looking for enemies amongst their own ranks, which only lowered morale. The Jedi understand how dangerous the Force can be in the wrong hands, but they also forgot the beauty and importance of individuality, and how every person has their own specific way of interacting with the Force. It's one of the most intimate relationships you can have. And every Jedi is different and probably needed a different type of training in order to find fulfillment. The ancient Jedi understood this. The planet of Tython had two moons, Bogan, which was bathed in dark side energy, and Ashla, which was bathed in light side energy. Whenever a Jedi was perceived to be imbalanced, they would be sent to one of these moons to rebalance. The Jedi tried to find balance by eliminating an entire faction of the Force that just happened to be the exact opposite of their belief system. That's not balance. Whereas the Jedi focuses on balance at the individual level and has less overall structure as an organization. They understood that it was important to create a strong foundation and strong roots, and then everything else kind of takes care of itself. Now, I'm not saying that if the Jedi adopted this more relaxed stance, it would eliminate any type of schism or conflict, but what it would most certainly do is lower the chances that the Jedi crack down on some genuinely harmless activities that just happen to be dark side aligned. I mean, this idea that destroying the dark side brings balance to the Force just, again, doesn't make any sense. Without death and decay, how is there life and growth? Without the bitter moments, how can we appreciate the sweetness of life? Real courage, real heroic behavior is not about ignoring fear necessarily. It's about understanding the potential dangers a situation poses, but not letting that define how you see that situation. Sometimes people just need a chance. They need someone else to see the good in them so that they can progress. And I think there's one other thing that could really help the Jedi Order, stop its members from falling to the dark side. See, the Jedi ideology is flawed because on the surface level, it's a mimicry of Eastern spirituality, which deals more with harmony and internal balance. The Jedi even wear robes and use mysterious chi-like energy. But beneath the surface, we find a Jedi ideology that is more structured like a religion. The Jedi are not just warrior monks, they are an institution, a great one with a long history full of tradition. There is hierarchy here, codes, and structures. It's necessary to a certain degree, but for all of this to work, the individual still must have faith. They must have spirituality, a personal connection to the Force. And imagine if you are a Jedi and you are connecting to something as intimate as the Force and you're not able to also access your full range of emotions. that actually stunts you. I want to be clear, I'm not saying that the Jedi banned emotions. Officially, they didn't want people to be controlled by their emotions, which I think is a good idea. But the late Republic era specifically created an environment where you had Ki-Adi-Mundi and Mace Windu being all angry and distrustful of more emotional Padawans, to the point where strong emotions were pathologized and feared. And so people started getting scared. They started overcorrecting, which created problems, or some Jedi just retreated and stopped, interacting with other people and started hiding their more emotional side. Anakin became more and more withdrawn from the Order because of this and couldn't ask the people close to him, like Obi-Wan Kenobi, what to do when he started having visions of the death of Padme. I know 100% how Obi-Wan would have responded in that situation if Anakin actually reached out to him for help. He would have told Anakin the story of Satine, who died in his arms, filling him with deep regret and sorrow. Obi-Wan acknowledges this, probably for the first time, in order to connect with his apprentice. I don't know if Kenobi can actually save Anakin from Palpatine, but it'd be better than what actually happens in the movie. Dude shows up like he's on that Mari segment, Who's the Baby's Daddy? And then what about Dooku's passion, his hatred of corruption and the deceit of the political class in the Republic? We talked about the legality of Mace Windu striking down Palpatine. Well, Dooku had every right to choke the shit out of that senator who had ordered his men to kill him. The Jedi actually had a good solution to rogues like Dooku. Take a look at someone like Quinlan Vos, who was sent to work with the criminal underground. Dooku would have been a terrific Jedi plant in high society where he can investigate the industrialists and corpos and political elites that would start the Clone Wars. The problem is to think that we're born either good or evil. The truth is, it's just the switch. And people can turn on a dime, and it's terrifying. The Jedi became so afraid of this possibility that they treated their members as liabilities, something they needed to restrain and closely watch, instead of human beings who needed to be nurtured, who needed to develop in a safe and kind environment surrounded by loved ones so that they could feel safe and learn how to properly regulate emotions. This is childhood development 101. Actually, children need to be attached to a parental figure at a young age because that serves as a base for all of their exploration and development. If you remove that from them, they become withdrawn. They don't develop the proper mechanisms to deal with stress and anxiety. They're more likely to lash out in crazy ways. That is how you literally create a Sith Lord. The Jedi needed to get back to the basics and focus on raising their members properly. They needed to back away from politics, from war, from all of their duties. The Jedi probably needed to retreat from normal society and create an isolated monastic order where they could actually focus on developing their relationship with the Force, because that's already a full-time job. Well, there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed my analysis of the situation. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.